The most feared man in Chicago is dead. That is what they want you to believe. Adrian Valenti, the name that made grown men sweat through their shirts, that closed restaurants with a phone call, that moved money through this city like blood through a body, gone. A closed casket, a short obituary. No flowers. But power like that does not simply disappear. It waits. If you are new here, subscribe now and follow this story to the end, because what happens next will shock you. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The casket was mahogany, expensive, the kind of wood that cost more than most people made in a month, and Adrian Valenti had chosen it himself. He stood in the back of the funeral home at 2 a.m, alone except for Raymond Cho, the only man in his organization he still trusted enough to be in the same room with. The viewing had ended hours ago. The flowers were already wilting. Someone had left a bottle of scotch near the entrance. No card, no name, just a bottle, the way you leave something for the dead when you are not sure what else to offer. Adrian looked at the casket and felt nothing. That bothered him more than anything else. He was 41 years old. He had built his empire from a single gambling debt someone else could not pay. And now that empire moved nearly $1 billion through Chicago's underground every year. He had outlasted 3 federal investigations, 2 assassination attempts, and 1 very stupid cousin who thought loyalty was optional. He was supposed to feel something standing here, looking at a box that was supposed to contain him. Instead, he felt the same cold arithmetic he always felt when a problem needed to be solved. Someone inside his organization was selling him, not small things, not the kind of low-level chatter that every outfit leaked to the wrong people sometimes. Someone close was moving detailed, protected, classified information, account structures, shipment timing, property deeds hidden behind layers of shell companies, straight to the Renata family on the north side. For 6 months, the leaks had been small enough to ignore. For the last 8 weeks, they had been precise enough to terrify him. 2 of his warehouses had been raided by federal agents within hours of Adrian scheduling private meetings about them. 3 of his distributors had been arrested after route changes that only 4 people knew about. Last week, a man named Ortega, who had worked courier routes for Adrian since the early days, was found in the river. Not shot. Drowned. That meant someone wanted it to look like an accident, wanted the body found, wanted Adrian to know they were getting close enough to touch the people around him. Adrian had spent 36 hours going through every name in his organization. He had used every method available to him. Surveillance, financial records, pattern analysis, personal interrogations that he would not describe in polite company. He had come up with 8 suspects and no proof, which meant whoever was selling him was patient, careful, and embedded deep enough to know how Adrian investigated leaks, which meant Adrian could not investigate this the normal way. So he had faked his death. Raymond had arranged the official story. A blood clot, sudden, no warning, the kind of thing that could not be questioned without an autopsy, and there would be no autopsy because the right paperwork had gone to the right people. The casket held 200 pounds of ballast weight and a dental mold. Everything else had been handled. "You look like a man at his own funeral," Raymond said from the doorway. He was 63, heavy-set, with the kind of face that forgot how to smile sometime in the previous decade. He had been with Adrian since the beginning. "I am," Adrian said. "You sure about this?" Adrian picked up the scotch bottle from near the door and looked at the label. Mid-shelf. Whoever left it did not love him that much. "No, that's not reassuring. I'm not trying to reassure you." He set the bottle down. "I need you to run operations through the usual channels. Do not change anything. Do not react to anything. If the leaks continue while I'm gone, we narrow the field." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "And if something goes wrong at the Harwick estate?" "Then I'm just a broke mechanic who got fired." "You've never fixed a car in your life." "I've had people fix cars for me for 20 years. I've watched. I know enough." Adrian pulled on a jacket that was not his. Worn denim, the elbows frayed, a tear along the left pocket seam that someone had tried to mend with the wrong color thread. It smelled like someone else's life. "Nobody looks at the help, Raymond. That's the point." The Harwick estate sat on 12 acres in a suburb that pretended it was not attached to Chicago's money. The property had belonged to a textile magnate in the 1940s, changed hands 4 times, and had been quietly purchased through a series of fronts by Adrian's organization 11 years ago. On paper, it was a private residence managed by a property company. In practice, it was the organizational hub for Adrian's legitimate holdings: the accounting, the payroll management, the legal interfaces that kept the rest of the operation clean enough to survive scrutiny. The staff at Harwick did not know who owned the property. They knew the rules, the schedules, the chain of command that ended at a man named Director Lorne Bissell, who was Adrian's senior financial officer and one of the 8 people on Adrian's suspect list. Adrian arrived at the estate at 7 in the morning, driving a 2009 pickup truck with a cracked windshield and one headlight slightly lower than the other. He had a fabricated employment record, a social security number that would pass a background check, and a name: Evan Cole. Evan Cole had a sister in Milwaukee he never talked to, a landlord who had recently evicted him, and a mechanical certification from a community college in downstate Illinois. Evan Cole was 41 years old, quiet, had no criminal record, and was not particularly good at making eye contact. Adrian had practiced the posture for 3 days: shoulders slightly forward, chin down. The particular way a man carries himself when he has lost more arguments with the world than he has won. The groundskeeper who handled the estate's vehicle maintenance had quit unexpectedly 2 weeks prior, a resignation that Adrian himself had quietly engineered through Raymond. The job posting had gone up through the property company. Adrian had applied. He had been hired after a 15-minute phone interview with a woman in HR who had not once asked a question he could not answer. He parked the truck near the service entrance and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, looking at the back of a building he had paid for with money that had cost people more than they intended to spend. The morning light was flat and gray. A gardener was moving along the far fence line, head down, not looking at anything except the work in front of him. Adrian got out of the truck. The service entrance was a plain steel door with a keypad. He had the code. Raymond had pulled it from the property management files without leaving a trace. He punched it in, stepped into a hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and old wood, and found the facilities office without looking for a sign. He had studied the floor plan. The man behind the facilities desk was somewhere in his late 40s, wearing a button-down shirt with a company logo on the pocket. His name was Chuck Belmar, and he was the kind of man who wore authority like an ill-fitting suit, a little too aware of it, a little too quick to remind others it was there. He looked at Adrian the way people look at problems they did not cause but will have to manage anyway. "Cole?" "Yes, sir." "You're late." Adrian glanced at his watch. It was 7:02. "I apologize. Traffic on 41 was bad." Belmar grunted. "Benefits don't start until 90 days. You clock in through the tablet on the wall. You do not use the main entrance. You do not park in the front lot. You eat in the staff room, not the main kitchen." He slid a laminated sheet of rules across the desk without standing up. "Any questions?" "No, sir." Belmar looked at him for one more second, the way a man looks at something he is trying to decide whether to invest attention in, and clearly decided the answer was no. "Shop's out back. The Bentley needs a brake inspection. Filters on the Range Rover are overdue. List is on the workbench." Adrian took the laminated sheet, folded it carefully, and put it in his jacket pocket. "Thank you." He found the shop. He found the workbench. He found the list, which was longer than a brake inspection, and a filter change. And he spent the next 4 hours working through it with the methodical patience of a man who had learned to be patient in situations where impatience got people hurt. He was good with his hands. He had not lied to Raymond, not entirely. You did not grow up the way Adrian grew up. 3 neighborhoods, 2 uncles who worked in chop shops, a father who supplemented income by stripping parts from cars other people owned, without picking up certain skills. He was not a master mechanic, but he knew enough. He could make it look right. What surprised him was that it did not feel like performance. There was something in the work itself, the specific resistance of a bolt that had corroded into its housing, the way brake fluid smelled when it was genuinely old, the satisfaction of a filter seat clicking clean, that kept his mind focused in a way that running an empire had stopped doing years ago. He ate lunch alone in the staff room, which turned out to be a narrow space with a folding table, a microwave that needed cleaning, and a window that looked out onto the dumpster area. He had brought nothing to eat. He had not planned well. He sat at the table with a cup of bad coffee from the machine in the corner and looked at the wall. The door opened at 12:40. A woman came in, already carrying a container of food, already halfway through unwrapping it before she registered that someone was sitting at the table. She stopped. She was maybe 34, 35. Dark hair pulled back in a bun that was losing the argument with the second half of the workday. She wore the gray uniform of the cleaning staff. She looked at Adrian, at his empty hands, the empty table, the cup of coffee, and then looked away, moving to the microwave. She did not say anything for a minute. Neither did he. The microwave ran. The smell of rice and something savory filled the small room. "You're the new mechanic," she said. Not a question. "Yeah." "Evan?" "Yeah." She took her container out of the microwave and stood there, holding it with both hands, and Adrian watched her go through some internal calculation that she did not announce. Then she set the container on the table between them, pulled a plastic fork from her pocket, and pushed it toward the center. "I have enough," she said. It came out like she was not sure it was true but had decided to say it anyway. Adrian looked at the container. Rice, braised greens, 2 pieces of chicken that had been stretched as far as they could go. A meal that had been planned for one person who did not have money to spare. "I'm fine," he said. "You don't have anything." "I forgot to pack. It's not a problem." She sat down across from him, pulled the container back to her side, and ate a few bites. Then she pushed it to the middle of the table again. "I'm Mara." He looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at her food, matter of fact, like this was not a gesture, like she was not giving something that cost her. Adrian Valenti, who had not eaten a meal he did not control the environment of in more than a decade, picked up the fork. "Thank you," he said. She shrugged, ate, did not make it into something. They sat in silence for the rest of the lunch break. The microwave hummed. The dumpster outside rattled in the wind. Adrian ate food that someone else had cooked, at a table that was not his, in a building he owned, next to a woman who did not know his name. Not his real name. He thought about what Raymond had said at the funeral home. Nobody looks at the help. He had meant it as a tactical observation. Looking at Mara now, the worn cuffs of her uniform, the specific economy of how she moved, like someone who had learned to make everything last, Adrian understood that it was also a moral failure, a thing he had participated in for a very long time without ever quite examining it. He did not examine it now either. He filed it away, the way he filed most things, and finished eating. That afternoon, he worked through the vehicle list and spent 40 minutes watching the estate through the shop window. He could see 3 sections of the main house from this angle, including the east wing where Bissell maintained his office. At 2:15, a car arrived at the front entrance that Adrian did not recognize. A gray sedan, no plates visible from his angle, a driver who sat behind the wheel without turning off the engine. Someone came out of the east wing entrance and spoke to the driver through the window for approximately 4 minutes, then went back inside. The car left. Adrian noted the time, the duration, and the approximate height of the person who had come outside. He could not see their face from this angle. He would need to adjust his position tomorrow. He stayed late to finish the Range Rover, clocked out at 6:40, and drove the cracked windshield pickup back to the rented room in a neighborhood that had been declining for 20 years and had recently stopped bothering to hide it. The room cost him $310 a week and smelled like the previous tenant's habits. He had lived in a penthouse apartment for the last 12 years. He sat on the edge of a mattress that had seen better decades and made notes in a system that existed only in his own head. 3 things: the gray sedan, the East Wing meeting, and Mara Whitfield, who had shared her lunch with a man she did not know, without asking for anything, without making it mean anything. He stared at the water stain on the ceiling above the bed and thought about trust. What it was, really, not the thing you bought, not the thing you built through fear, the thing you stumbled across in a staff room with a bad microwave and a woman who gave away food she could not afford to give. He did not know what to do with that. He did know what to do with the gray sedan. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, he fell asleep before he had solved the problem in front of him. which was either a sign that he was finally learning something or a sign that he was in more danger than he understood. The next morning, he arrived at the shop at 6:50. He was early. The gray sedan was already parked behind the east wing, engine off this time, and the man leaning against the driver's door was looking directly at the shop window. Adrian kept his head down and walked inside. His hands were completely steady. His chest was not. The man by the gray sedan did not move for a long time. Adrian stood inside the shop with his back against the wall beside the window, not looking directly out. Watching through his peripheral vision, the way you learn to watch things when looking directly at them, is a liability. The man was medium height, broad through the shoulders, wearing a dark jacket that was too clean for someone who worked with his hands and too plain for someone who was supposed to be noticed. He was not a driver. Drivers waited inside the car or smoked near the rear bumper. This man was positioned to see the shop entrance, which meant he was there because of something in the shop, which meant he was there because of Adrian. Adrian breathed through his nose, slow and deliberate, and moved away from the window to the workbench. He picked up a wrench, put it down, picked up a rag and started wiping down a socket set that did not need wiping. He kept his hands moving because still hands drew attention the way still water drew mosquitoes, and because there was a specific kind of fear that lived in the base of the spine and moved upward through the body like cold water, and the only way to keep it from reaching your face was to give your hands something to do. He had been made in less than 24 hours. That was the first thought. The second thought, arriving almost simultaneously, was that if he had been made, he would already be in a different situation. Nobody sent one man to stand outside a shop window to watch someone they had identified as a threat. You sent one man to watch someone you were not sure about yet. Adrian kept wiping the socket set. The man outside stayed for 11 minutes, then got back in the gray sedan and drove out through the service gate. Adrian did not move from the workbench until he heard the gate close. He let out a breath that had been waiting for somewhere to go. Chuck Belmar came through the shop door at 8:15 with a coffee mug in one hand and the expression of a man who had already found 3 things wrong with his morning and was prepared to find more. Bentley brake job done. Finished it yesterday afternoon. Belmar looked at the car in question, then back at Adrian as though he expected the claim to fall apart under examination. The rear left was pulling? Caliper was sticking. I freed it, cleaned the slide pins, resurfaced the rotor. Should be fine. If it pulls again inside a month, the caliper needs replacement. Belmar said nothing for a moment. He was recalibrating something. Where'd you work before this? Private Fleet Management, Northbrook. Why'd you leave? Adrian looked at him. Company downsized. It was the correct answer in the correct register. Flat, slightly tired, the tone of a man who had told this story enough times that the embarrassment had worn off and left only the blunt fact. Belmar held the look for another second, then nodded and left. Adrian went back to work. At 10:30, he was underneath the Range Rover checking the exhaust mounting brackets when he heard voices from the small courtyard adjacent to the shop. 2 of the estate's administrative staff, a man and a woman, standing close together in the way people stood when they did not want to be overheard inside the building. He lay still under the vehicle and listened. Bissell moved the Thursday meeting again. The woman's voice, low, controlled, but with an edge underneath it. 3rd time. The man. Something's happening with the account structures. I pulled the variance report this morning, and 3 of the subsidiary columns don't match the figures from last quarter. A pause. You sure? I'm an accountant, Derek. I know what a column is supposed to add up to. Don't go to Bissell with that. I'm not stupid. I know you're not. I'm saying don't go to anyone. Not yet. Just document it. Keep copies somewhere he can't reach. The voices dropped further, and Adrian could not make out the next exchange. Then footsteps on the courtyard stones, moving away in separate directions. He lay under the Range Rover for another 30 seconds, staring up at the exhaust system, and recalibrated everything he thought he knew about the situation inside Harwick. Lorne Bissell was not just leaking information to the Renata family. He was restructuring the financial architecture of Adrian's legitimate holdings, which meant the betrayal was not about selling intelligence, it was about asset consolidation. Moving the pieces before the board was flipped, so that when Adrian's organization was dismantled or taken over, the real property, the real money, The infrastructure that all of it ran through would already be positioned to transfer cleanly. This was not a rat in his organization. This was a planned acquisition. Adrian got out from under the Range Rover, sat on the creeper, and pressed his fingers against his temples. His head ached. He had not slept enough. The mattress in the rented room had a spring that found the same spot on his lower back every night, no matter how he positioned himself. And he had been awake at 4 in the morning going through the accounting structures he had memorized before coming here, and now those structures looked different than they had at 4 in the morning. He needed to reach Raymond without using any of the channels that Bissell's people might be monitoring. He needed to do it without anyone at the estate noticing that a broke mechanic was conducting a financial intelligence operation from an exhaust-smelling shop in the back of the property. He needed to do all of this while the gray sedan came back every morning at a slightly different time, which he confirmed over the next 3 days. 6:50 the first morning, 7:10 the next, 6:40 the morning after that. Irregular enough to suggest professional training, regular enough to suggest a fixed instruction. Watch the shop, report activity. Someone knew something. They did not know enough yet. Adrian had a window. He did not know how wide it was. On the 4th evening, Mara knocked on the open shop door at 5:50, which was 10 minutes before the end of his shift. She was carrying a paper bag, and she looked like someone who had worked a shift that had started too early and ended too late, and was pretending not to notice. "You eat today?" she said. "Lunch. I mean, a real meal." He put down what he was working on and looked at her. "You don't have to do this." "I had extra." She set the bag on the corner of the workbench, not close enough to force the issue. "There's a sandwich and some soup in a thermos. It's nothing special." Adrian wiped his hands on the rag he kept tucked in his back pocket. "Mara, you don't have to eat it. It was extra." She said it the same way she had said, "I have enough" on the first day, with that same quality of stating a fact she had decided to believe into being true. He picked up the bag. The thermos inside was warm. "Thank you," he said. She nodded and started to leave. "Who's the woman who works in the East Wing accounting office?" he said. "Dark hair? Works late?" Mara stopped, turned slightly. "Claire Sue, why?" "She seemed upset today. In the courtyard. Wanted to make sure everything was okay." Mara studied him for a moment. It was a particular kind of study. Not suspicious exactly, but precise. The way someone looked at something they were trying to take an honest measure of. "Claire's been upset for a while. She doesn't talk about it." "What's she upset about?" "I don't know. We don't have those kinds of conversations." A beat. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who just fixes cars." Adrian said nothing. Mara looked at him a moment longer, then left. He ate the sandwich standing at the workbench and thought about what she had said. "You ask a lot of questions." He had been careless. 4 days in, and he was already moving faster than he should, letting the urgency of what he knew override the patience the situation required. That was a mistake he could not afford to repeat. He needed to slow down. He also needed to find out what Claire Sue had documented, where she had stored it, and whether Bissell already knew she had been pulling variance reports. The next morning, he arrived at the shop to find the gray sedan already there, parked closer than before. Not behind the East Wing now, but directly in the service lot. No pretense of distance. The same man, same clean jacket, sitting on the hood this time with his arms crossed, looking at the shop entrance without trying to seem like he was looking at it. Adrian walked past him without a glance. Inside, he went to the facilities office. Belmar was not in yet. He sat down in the chair across from the empty desk, which was not the behavior of a mechanic waiting to start his shift, and he gave himself 45 seconds to make a decision he had been circling for 3 days. He needed inside access to the East Wing. The only plausible reason a maintenance worker had to be in the East Wing was a repair order. He needed to generate one. He needed to do it in a way that did not originate from him, could not be traced back to a request he had made, and would be accepted by Bissell's staff as routine. He spent the morning thinking about it and came up with nothing he liked. What he got instead was a different problem entirely. At 11:40, Chuck Belmar came into the shop while Adrian was bleeding air from a brake line, and he was not alone. The man from the sedan was standing slightly behind him and to the left. which was the position of someone who expected resistance and had arranged himself to address it. Cole. Belmar's voice was different, not the low-grade contempt of a man who considered you beneath his attention, something tighter. This is Mr. Harker. He's doing a security review of all estate personnel. Harker was mid-40s, flat eyes, handshake firm jaw. He looked at Adrian the way you looked at a room you were planning to take apart. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Harker said. His voice was even, practiced. Sure, Adrian said. He stayed where he was, crouched beside the brake line, because standing up would look like he had something to prove, and a mechanic being questioned by security did not have anything to prove. How long have you been doing vehicle maintenance? About 12 years. Before Northbrook Fleet? Couple of independent shops, DeKalb, then Elgin. Harker nodded, the nod of someone recording rather than responding. You live in the city now? North side, off Kimball. You know anyone connected to this property before you applied? Adrian looked up from the brake line. Not quickly, just normally, the way you looked up when a question landed in an unexpected spot. No, saw the job posting online. Harker held eye contact for 3 seconds longer than the question warranted. We're running updated background checks on all new hires. Routine. Might take a couple of days, just wanted you to know. Okay, Adrian said. Harker left. Belmar followed without looking at Adrian. Adrian turned back to the brake line. His hands were completely steady. He bled the line, capped it, wiped the fitting clean, and stood up very slowly. The background check was not going to find anything. Raymond had built the Evan Cole identity through channels that had survived 3 previous federal-level searches. But a background check meant Harker was running names through a system, and every system had a back end, and the back end connected to people, and people connected to things that could unravel in unexpected directions. He had days, maybe fewer. That evening, he found Mara in the staff room again, later than usual, sitting at the folding table with her shoes off, rubbing her left foot with both hands. She looked up when he came in, started to put the shoe back on. Don't, he said. I'm just getting coffee. She stopped, left the shoe where it was. He poured the bad coffee and sat down across from her, which by now had become a thing they did. Not a plan, not a ritual, just a pattern they had fallen into because the room was small and the table was there, and neither of them had anywhere more important to be. Hard day? He said. Bissell had a dinner party, 8 people, extra setup, extra cleanup, extra everything. She pressed her thumb into the arch of her foot. Nobody says thank you, not one person. The guests? Bissell. The guests I don't expect, but Bissell's been here 3 years. He knows my name. He's never once. She stopped, let out a short breath through her nose. It doesn't matter. It matters. She looked at him. It matters, he said again. He was not sure why he said it twice. It came out more certain the second time, like a statement that was true before he fully understood why. Mara studied him with that precise look again. You're not from a place like this, she said. What do you mean? I mean you're not this. She gestured vaguely at the room, the uniform, the folding table. You've been somewhere else, I can tell. Adrian drank the bad coffee and said nothing. I'm not asking, she said. People come here for different reasons. I'm not going to make it my business. She put her shoe back on. I just notice things. What kind of things? The way you watch people, the way you listen. You never just look, you assess. She stood up, tucked the chair under the table. The mechanic who worked here before you, Tommy, he looked at the cars. You look at the people. She picked up her bag from the floor. Mara, he said. She paused. Be careful around Bissell. She frowned. Why? I'm not sure yet. Just be careful. She held his gaze for a moment, and in that moment something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not suspicion. Something more complicated than either of those things. The look of a woman who had learned to read the difference between a warning and a threat, and was deciding which category this fell into. Okay, she said quietly, and left. 3 days passed. On the morning of the 3rd day, Claire Sue's parking space was empty. It stayed empty through the afternoon. By the time Adrian left that evening, word had spread through the estate staff in the particular way that bad news traveled through contained spaces, in pieces, without attribution, arriving already understood. Claire Sue had resigned, abruptly, no notice. Her desk had been cleaned out sometime between 9 the previous evening and 6 that morning. Adrian drove back to the rented room and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about what that meant. Claire had been documenting discrepancies. She had told someone, Derek, whoever Derek was, to keep copies where Bissell could not reach them. Now Claire was gone. Not fired. Resigned. That was a specific word. That was a word that meant someone had been offered a choice between leaving quietly and something worse, and had made the sensible decision. Bissell knew about the variance reports, which meant Bissell was moving faster than Adrian had estimated, which meant Adrian had no more time to be careful about how he got into the East Wing. He reached under the mattress and pulled out the burner phone he had told himself he would only use if the situation became critical. He turned it on. He dialed Raymond's secondary number, the one that routed through 3 separate relays before it connected. Raymond picked up on the second ring. "You're early." "Bissell is cleaning house. He burned an accountant named Claire Sue this week. I need you to find out where she went, whether she kept copies of what she documented, and whether anyone on our legal team has been in contact with her." A pause. "You think she has leverage?" "I think she's terrified and she documented something real. And if Bissell finds her before we do, we lose the cleanest evidence we're going to get." "Understood." Another pause, longer this time. "There's something you need to know." Adrian waited. "The Renata family made a move last night. They approached 2 of your distribution captains directly, not through intermediaries, directly by name, with detailed knowledge of their routes and contact protocols." The cold thing moved up from the base of Adrian's spine again. "That information came from inside Harwick," Raymond said. "The distribution captain's contact protocols live in one system. That system is administered from the East Wing." "I know." "The people they approached, one of them called us. The other one didn't." Adrian stood up. The mattress spring caught his weight differently without him on it, and creaked once in the silence. "Which one didn't call?" Raymond told him. Adrian ended the call, turned the phone off, and put it back under the mattress. He stood in the center of the rented room with its water-stained ceiling and its smell of someone else's history. And for the first time since he had put on Evan Cole's frayed jacket and walked through the service entrance of his own property, he felt the specific weight of what he was actually doing here. Not investigating a leak, not identifying a traitor, not protecting an empire. He was standing in a collapsing building, trying to find the support structure before the ceiling came down. And the people doing the collapsing had just told him that someone he trusted had opened a door from the inside. He thought about Mara, the way she had said USS. The way she had looked at him when he told her to be careful, that precise, complicated look that landed somewhere between trust and doubt and came down finally on the side of taking him seriously. She was in that building too. She did not know it. He sat back down on the edge of the mattress and stared at the floor. The decision he needed to make was not complicated. It was only hard, which was a different thing entirely, and it had to be made before morning because by morning Harker's background check would be finished, and by morning Bissell might know that Claire Sue had spoken to someone in the courtyard before she disappeared, and by morning the window he had been working inside would be closed or closing. He was going to have to go into the East Wing tomorrow. He was going to have to do it without a cover story that would hold. And if the gray sedan was there when he arrived, and the man in the clean jacket was positioned where he could see the East Wing entrance as well as the shop, Adrian was going to have to make a decision he was not ready to make about how much of himself to expose, and how quickly, in a building full of people who were either traitors or witnesses, with a woman somewhere on one of those floors who had shared her food with a stranger and did not know the stranger was the most dangerous man she had ever been kind to. He lay down on the bad mattress and did not sleep. At 6:30 in the morning, he drove the cracked windshield pickup through the service gate, and the gray sedan was already parked at the East Wing entrance. And there were 2 men this time, not one. And the second man was on his phone. And when Adrian turned into the service lot, the second man looked directly at him, directly, without the pretense of looking elsewhere first, and then turned away and said something into the phone that Adrian could not hear. Adrian parked the truck. He sat behind the wheel for exactly 4 seconds. Then he got out, walked toward the east wing entrance instead of the shop, and the first man stepped into his path with one hand slightly raised and said, in the tone of someone who had rehearsed this, "Staff entrances around back." Adrian stopped, looked at the man, looked at the east wing door, and said quietly and clearly, "Tell Bissell that Evan Cole needs 5 minutes." The man's expression did not change, but his hand dropped. He reached for his radio. The man with the radio did not move fast. He moved carefully, which was worse. Adrian stood in the thin morning light outside the east wing entrance and watched the man key the radio and speak into it low enough that the words did not carry. The second man had not moved from his position near the sedan. He was not looking at his phone anymore. He was looking at Adrian with the specific quality of attention that meant he had been told to look and not stop looking. Adrian kept his hands visible and his breathing even and thought about the 4 seconds he had sat in the truck before getting out. In those 4 seconds, he had run through every option available to him and concluded that all of them were worse than this one. Walking to the shop and pretending the 2 men were not there meant giving them the initiative. Leaving the property meant abandoning the only position he had. Calling Raymond meant burning the burner phone before he had what he needed. Asking for Bissell directly was the only move that gave him information faster than it cost him cover. What he got instead, 60 seconds after the man with the radio made his call, was not Bissell. The east wing door opened and Harker came out. Clean jacket, flat eyes, the practiced evenness of a man who had done this particular kind of thing enough times that it no longer produced anything in his face. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I need to speak with the estate director." "Mr. Bissell is unavailable this morning." "Then I'll wait." Harker looked at him for a moment, assessing the geometry of the situation. A mechanic who should be in a shop asking to see a financial director at 7 in the morning, standing in the service entrance with his hands at his sides and no particular expression on his face. It did not add up to anything that fit the categories Harker had available. "What's this regarding?" Harker said. "A maintenance issue in the east wing, 3rd floor. The HVAC intake in the north corridor has been running irregular pressure cycles. It'll damage the ductwork if it's not addressed." Harker said nothing. "I noticed it when I was cross-checking the mechanical schedules," Adrian said. "I can write it up if that's easier, but I need access to the intake panel to confirm the pressure readings before I write anything official." It was a specific kind of lie. Not elaborate, just technical enough to be plausible, grounded enough in real maintenance language to resist casual challenge, and offering a written alternative that gave Harker a way to say yes without fully committing to it. Harker studied him. "I'll have someone escort you up." "That's fine," Adrian said. The escort was one of the security staff, a young man who smelled of new cologne and held the door with the polite indifference of someone who had been told to take the mechanic upstairs and had no opinion about it. They rode the east wing elevator to the 3rd floor, which Adrian had memorized from the floor plans but had not yet seen. The north corridor was narrow, institutional, with fluorescent lighting that buzzed at a frequency most people learned to ignore. 3 offices on the left side, 2 on the right. At the end, a larger office with frosted glass panels. Bissell's. The door was closed. A light was on behind the frosted glass, which meant Bissell was in there, which meant the unavailable had been a test of some kind, or a precaution, or both. Adrian went to the HVAC intake panel on the north wall, which was a real panel, accessed with a real key that maintenance staff carried, and spent 7 minutes doing things to it that produced plausible sounds and justified his presence while he looked at everything the 3rd floor corridor had to show him. 2 of the 3 offices on the left were occupied. The nearer one held a man in his 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, working through a stack of printed documents with a highlighter. The second was Claire Sue's old office. It was empty, not just absent of person, absent of presence. The desk was clean in the way that surfaces were clean when everything on them had been removed and the surface itself had been wiped. A chair pushed in precisely. A monitor with the screen turned off. The office next to Bissell's held a woman Adrian did not recognize on the phone, speaking too quietly for the words to carry. Adrian closed the HVAC panel, noted the pressure readings on a form he had brought on a clipboard, and told the escort he would need to come back with a specific calibration tool he did not have on him today. The escort nodded and took him back downstairs. He was in the shop at 7:50, under the hood of a vehicle that needed nothing done to it, thinking. Claire Sue's office had been sanitized, not cleaned. Sanitized. That was a different operation, a different level of commitment, and it had been done fast, within 48 hours of her departure, which meant Bissell had not waited to see if she would say something. He had moved immediately to contain whatever she might say. That was the behavior of someone who knew exactly what she had found and was not willing to let the time between her leaving and his response give her any room to use it. And it meant that whatever Claire Sue had documented was real enough to move Bissell into immediate action. Adrian needed to find her before Harker did, if Harker had not already. He spent the morning going through the motions of the vehicle list and at lunch went to the staff room, where Mara was already at the table. She did not have extra food today. She had a single container and ate from it with the focused efficiency of someone rationing, and Adrian sat across from her with his bad coffee and did not pretend not to notice. "Claire Sue's office is cleared out," he said. Mara looked up. Something moved through her face. Not surprise, something older than surprise. Recognition. "I saw it this morning. You knew her. We used to walk out to the parking lot together at night, when it was late." She put her fork down. "She was scared of something. The last few weeks she barely talked." "Did she tell you anything?" Mara looked at him with that precise look, the one that took his measure slowly and without apology. "Why do you want to know?" He did not have an answer that was both honest and safe. He gave her the honest part. "Because I think she found something, and I think the wrong people are now looking for her." "The wrong people?" Mara repeated it flatly, not as a question. "Yes." The silence between them was a different quality than their usual silences. Those had been comfortable, the silence of two tired people who did not need to fill space. This one had weight. "She had a sister in Evanston," Mara said finally. "She mentioned her once, Elena, or Ellie, something like that." She picked up her fork again. "That's all I know." "Thank you." "Evan." Her voice stopped him before he stood up. "What is going on in this building?" He looked at her. He wanted, for a specific and uncharacteristic moment, to tell her. Not because it would help the situation, because she had earned it with every small act of ordinary decency she had performed in this staff room and that shop doorway, and every corridor she had walked through this building while Bissell walked the same corridors and did not know her name. She had earned the truth the way people earn things they were never paid. Through showing up, through not taking, through being the kind of person you only noticed when you started looking for what was real. He could not tell her, not yet, not here. "Something I need to figure out," he said. She held his gaze for 2 more seconds, then nodded. Let him go. He was back in the shop at 1:15 when his phone, not the burner, the secondary line Raymond could reach if the primary was unavailable, vibrated once in his jacket pocket, the signal they had agreed on for critical information. He went to the truck, got in, closed the door, and called back through the relay number. Raymond answered before the first ring finished. "She's already gone." Adrian went still. "Claire Sue." Harker's people found her at her sister's address in Evanston at 9 this morning. She went with them voluntarily. A pause that was not comfortable. "Adrian." She did not resist. She went with them, and there is no record of her being detained, and the sister says she left with 2 men and seemed frightened. The specific arithmetic of what that meant ran through Adrian's mind in the time it took him to draw one breath. If Claire Sue had gone voluntarily and was frightened and left no paper trail, then Bissell had leverage over her that preceded her resignation. Something she was afraid of that was bigger than the discrepancies she had documented, bigger than her own safety, something they had been holding in reserve for exactly this moment. "The documentation she kept," Adrian said. "We don't know if she—" "The documentation. Has anyone been able to locate copies?" Raymond was quiet for 3 seconds. "No." "Which means Bissell has them or has destroyed them." "Yes." Adrian pressed the back of his head against the headrest and stared at the truck's ceiling. The cracked windshield caught the afternoon light at an angle that split it into 2 unequal pieces. He thought about the shape of what he was facing and felt the peculiar cold clarity that arrived sometimes when a situation became simple in the worst possible way, when all the options collapsed into one. "Raymond," he said, who administered the distribution captain's contact protocol system from the East Wing. A long pause. Raymond? The system administrator for that database, Raymond said, and his voice had something in it that Adrian had not heard from him in 20 years. Something that was almost, but not quite, reluctance, was changed 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks ago. The same period the leaks had become precise enough to terrify him. Changed to whom? Adrian said. Raymond told him. Adrian sat with it for a moment, let it land fully before he responded, let it move through him the way something moved through you when it was heavy enough that you could not rush it, could not redirect it, could only let it arrive at its own speed and feel the full weight of it when it did. The name Raymond said was Marcus Vane, his lieutenant, his most trusted operational commander, the man who had been with him for 14 years, who had run logistics through 3 federal investigations and come out clean every time, who had stood at the funeral home while Adrian looked at the decoy casket and said, "You sure about this?" with the voice of someone who had a personal stake in the answer, who had been administering the distribution captain database for 8 weeks, who had known, from the moment Adrian decided to fake his death, exactly where the plan came from and what it was designed to expose, who had been positioned to watch the investigation from inside it the entire time. He knew, Adrian said. The words came out quiet, without inflection, which was what happened when the anger was too large to have a sound. He was in the room, Raymond said. He helped plan it. He knew every step, the identity, the estate, the timeline. Adrian's hand on the phone was completely steady. His voice was completely steady. Under both of those things, something was happening that had no external expression, a structural shift, like a building settling after the ground beneath it moved. How long? We think the approach from the Renata family started 18 months ago. 18 months. Marcus Vane had been selling him for a year and a half through 3 federal investigations that he came out of clean because he had been the one providing the information that kept the investigations focused on other areas, had been running logistics so efficiently because he had been negotiating his own position in whatever came after, had stood at the funeral home at 2 a.m. and expressed something that looked like concern and was actually surveillance. The man Adrian had trusted most completely was the man who had built the architecture of his destruction. "Where is he now?" Adrian said. "Chicago. He's been managing operations as interim director since your death. He's embedded, Adrian. If you move against him now from where you are, without proof that will hold against his version of events, half the organization will support him. He has been in place for 14 years. He has relationships we don't have a complete picture of. I know. You need to come back. We can rebuild the evidentiary case through—" "No." Adrian opened the truck door. The afternoon had gone gray, a flat overcast that made the estate's manicured grounds look like a stage set waiting for the play to start. "I need what Claire Sue documented. I need her original work. If Bissell has it, it's in that building. If it's in that building, I can get it." "Adrian," Raymond's voice had shifted into something older and more direct. "Parker ran your background check. It came back clean. But Bissell is smart enough to be suspicious of a check that comes back too clean. And if Marcus has given him your description, Marcus has never seen Evan Cole. He's seen Adrian Valenti. 12 years, 50 pounds, a different haircut, and clothes that don't fit right." Adrian looked at the east wing. The frosted glass on the 3rd floor caught the flat gray light and gave nothing back. "It's not the same face." "You hope it's not." "I know it's not. Marcus sees what he expects to see. He sent Harker here to look for threats. Evan Cole is not a threat. Evan Cole is a broke mechanic who fixes brake calipers and eats bad food from a coffee machine." He paused. "I have 1 more day before this position is untenable. I need you to locate Claire Sue. Whatever Bissell is holding over her, I need to know what it is. And if we can't reach her, then I go into the east wing tonight." Silence on the line. "Alone," Raymond said. "Yes. That's not a plan. That's a last resort dressed up as a plan." "I know what it is." Adrian ended the call. He went back to the shop and worked until 5:30 with the specific focus of a man who has decided something and is now simply moving through the hours until the decision becomes action. He torqued bolts to spec. He noted fluid levels. He swept the shop floor. These were things he did not have to do, and did with complete attention, because the mind needed somewhere to be while the rest of him arranged itself around what was coming. At 5:45, Mara appeared in the shop doorway again. She was in her coat now, bag over her shoulder, ready to leave. She looked at him with an expression that had something new in it, a tightness around the eyes, a quality of controlled urgency that she was working to keep out of her voice. "There's a man asking about you," she said, "at the front entrance. He's not from the property company. He doesn't have an ID badge. He told the front desk he's looking for a mechanic named Evan Cole to relay a message from a former employer." Adrian set down the wrench he was holding. "What did he look like?" "Older. Gray hair. Heavy." She paused. "He's been there for 40 minutes. Raymond would not send someone to the front entrance. Raymond would not send someone to the estate at all without prior contact through the relay number, which meant the man at the front entrance was not from Raymond, which meant Marcus had moved faster than Adrian had calculated, which meant Marcus had a description that was good enough to narrow the search to this property. "Mara," Adrian said. His voice came out different than it had in any of their previous conversations. Not softer, not harder, but stripped of the performance of Evan Cole. Cleaner than that, more direct than he had allowed himself to be in the 10 days he had spent in this building. "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to do it quickly." She did not flinch from the shift in his voice. She held it, absorbed it, stayed where she was. "Do not go back to the front entrance," he said. "Do not speak to that man. Take the service exit off the south corridor and go directly to your car." "Evan, there are documents on the 3rd floor of the East Wing, in Bissell's office or in the office directly adjacent. I need to get to them tonight, before the building closes, and before that man at the front entrance has time to confirm what he came here to confirm." He looked at her. "I cannot explain everything to you right now. I need you to trust that I am not the person in this building who means you harm." The silence lasted 4 seconds. He counted them. "The service exit off the south corridor," she said. "Yes." She started to turn. Stopped. "The office adjacent to Bissell's," she said. "The woman in there. She leaves at 6:15 exactly. Every day. She locks the door, but the East Wing service master key is in the facility's lockbox. Code is the estate's zip code." She walked out of the shop door and turned south. Adrian stood in the empty shop and felt something move through him that was not gratitude exactly, because gratitude was too small and too simple for what she had just done. A woman with no reason to trust him, no knowledge of who he was, no protection available to her if the choice turned out to be wrong, who had looked at the situation and made a decision based on nothing more provable than the quality of his voice and the 10 days of ordinary decency they had shared across a folding table in a room that smelled like a microwave and industrial cleaner. He had built an empire on loyalty. He had never, until this moment, fully understood what it meant. He had 4 hours before the East Wing went dark. He went to the facility's lockbox. The code worked. The master key was on the 3rd hook. Adrian Valenti, who had faked his own death, who had spent 10 days pretending to be a man he was not in a building he owned, who had just discovered that the person he trusted most in the world had been dismantling everything he built for a year and a half, pocketed the key, walked to the East Wing stairwell, and went up. On the 2nd floor landing, he heard voices from above. 2 men, not moving, positioned at the 3rd floor landing, and one of them said something into a radio that echoed down the stairwell with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. "He's in the building." Adrian stopped on the 2nd floor landing with his hand on the stairwell railing and understood, with the specific totality of a man who has run out of intermediate positions, that he was no longer investigating anything. He had just become the thing being hunted in his own building by the people he had trusted to run it, and the only person in the entire structure who had given him anything true was a woman in a gray uniform walking to her car through the south exit, who did not yet know that by helping him, she had made herself visible to the same people who were now coming down the stairs toward the sound of his breathing. He did not run. Running was sound. Sound was information. Information in a stairwell with 2 men above him and an unknown number below was the one thing he could not afford to give away for free. Adrian pressed his back against the second-floor landing wall, left of the stairwell door, and breathed through his mouth in slow, controlled pulls while he listened to the footsteps above him descend. 2 sets. Unhurried. The pace of men who believed they controlled the geometry of the situation and were not wrong about that yet. He had 4 seconds before they rounded the landing above and had a sight line to where he was standing. The stairwell door on the second floor had a push bar. No keypad on this side. East wing interior doors operated on the master key from outside, push bar from inside. He pushed it, slow enough that the hydraulic closer did not hiss, and stepped through into the second floor corridor. Fluorescent lighting. The same institutional quality as the third floor, slightly dimmer. He let the door close behind him without sound and moved left, away from the elevator bank, toward the far end of the corridor where the building plans showed a secondary utility access. A maintenance corridor that ran parallel to the main hall and connected to the East Wing's mechanical room on the ground floor. Behind him, through the stairwell door, he heard the footsteps reach the second floor landing. Stop. A voice. Low, one word into a radio he could not make out. He moved faster. The utility access was a plain door, no signage, the kind of door that existed in buildings as an afterthought and got ignored because nothing about it invited attention. The master key turned the lock in one motion and he was through, into a corridor that was darker and narrower and smelled like conduit insulation and the specific metallic cold of ductwork that had been running for 40 years. He pulled the door closed behind him, counted to 5. No footsteps in the secondary corridor, no light under the door. They had not seen which way he went. He moved through the utility corridor by touch and the thin ambient light from the emergency strips along the baseboard, keeping one hand on the left wall, and tried to construct an honest picture of where he stood, not where he wished he stood, not where his plan had assumed he would be at this point in the evening, where he actually was. He was in his own building, unarmed, with 2 men on the second floor who had been told he was here, with at least one more man at the front entrance who had come with a description that matched him well enough to narrow a search to this property. The East Wing had 2 exits he knew of, the main entrance where the gray sedan was parked, and the service gate he came through every morning. Both would be covered now. The master key got him through interior doors. It did not get him out of the building without being seen. He needed the third-floor office. He needed whatever Claire Sue had found and whatever Bissell had taken from her and kept here because men like Bissell kept evidence of their leverage close, in formats they controlled, where they could access it at 3 in the morning when the anxiety of what they were doing found them in the dark. He also needed to get out afterward. He was working on the second problem when the utility corridor ended at a metal door marked mechanical, authorized access. The master key worked. He stepped into the mechanical room, which was loud with the sound of the building's HVAC systems, and large enough that the ambient noise would cover his movement if he was not doing something that required more sound than a footstep. He crossed the mechanical room to the far side, where a steel staircase ran up through all 4 floors of the East Wing as the maintenance access route, the route the facilities staff used when they needed to reach the ductwork and electrical panels on the upper floors without going through the main corridors. It was not on the floor plan he had memorized. He had found it in the mechanical schedule that Belmar had left on the workbench during his first week, a document that laid out the quarterly inspection routes for every system in the building. He had read it because he read everything. He went up the maintenance stairs to the 3rd floor. The access point on the 3rd floor was a panel in the utility alcove between the 2 offices on the north side of the corridor, between Claire Sue's old office and Bissell's. He released the panel catch from the inside, a simple lever mechanism, and held it without opening it and listened. Corridor sounds, the fluorescent buzz. Somewhere further away, a door closing. He opened the panel. The 3rd floor corridor was empty. He was out of the utility alcove and at the door of the adjacent office in 4 seconds. Master key. The door opened. He was inside and had it closed behind him before the corridor had time to produce anyone. The office was small. 1 desk, 1 monitor, 2 filing cabinets, a credenza along the left wall. The woman who worked here, he had seen her on his first authorized visit this morning, on the phone, speaking quietly, was gone, as Mara had said she would be. Gone at 6:15 exactly. every day. He did not turn on the overhead light. The building's external security lighting came through the window in a pale wash that was enough to work by if his eyes stayed adjusted to it. He went to the filing cabinets first, both locked. The master key was a building key, not a furniture key, and he stood in front of the locked cabinets for 2 seconds before he moved to the desk. The desk drawers were not locked. The top drawer held office supplies and a phone charging cable and nothing else. The second drawer held printed reports in manila folders, labeled with dates and project codes. He went through them fast, reading the labels, not opening anything that did not fit the pattern he was looking for. The variance analysis that Claire had referenced, the subsidiary account discrepancies, the specific columns that had not added up. The third folder from the front of the second drawer had no label. He opened it. Inside, 14 pages of printed spreadsheet data, annotated in handwriting that was small and precise and had the controlled urgency of someone who was writing quickly because they were afraid of running out of time. Column figures. Highlighted cells. Margin notes that traced a transfer sequence through 4 subsidiary entities over a period of 9 months, and at the bottom of the last page, a single line written in a different ink than the rest, darker, written after the others, written in the moment of final understanding, MV authorization codes on every transfer. All of them. MV Marcus Vane. Adrian stood in the dark office with the folder in his hands and understood the full architecture of it for the first time. Bissell had not been working for the Renata family. Bissell had been working for Marcus. The Renata family was the destination, the buyer, but Marcus was the seller, and Bissell was the mechanism. The man inside the legitimate structure who moved the assets quietly through the financial layer while Marcus handled the operational side, feeding intelligence to the Renatas to weaken Adrian's organization from the outside while Marcus hollowed it from within. It was elegant. It was patient. It was exactly the kind of plan that a man built when he had spent 14 years learning exactly how his employer thought. Adrian had taught Marcus everything he knew about how to run an organization. Marcus had used it to take the organization apart from the inside. He folded the papers carefully and put them in the interior pocket of the frayed denim jacket. Then he stood in the dark for one more second and thought about Mara, who was supposed to be at her car by now, who was supposed to be gone from this building and heading home to wherever home was. A woman who carried family debt and shared food she could not spare and had given him the zip code and the key location and the name of the woman who left at 6:15 because she had looked at him across a staff room table and made a decision about who he was. He needed her to be gone from this building. He moved back to the utility alcove, into the maintenance staircase, and went down. He was on the ground floor landing when the maintenance access door at the bottom opened from the outside and the light from the mechanical room framed 2 silhouettes that were not the building's maintenance staff. One of them had a flashlight. The beam hit Adrian at chest level before he could move back up the stairs, and the man behind the flashlight said, "Don't," in a voice that was not asking. Adrian stopped. "Hands," the man said. He put his hands up. The specific kind of up that communicated compliance without surrender. Elbows level with his shoulders, palms out, the posture of someone who understood the instruction and had not yet decided how to respond to it. The 2 men came up the stairs. The one without the flashlight reached Adrian first and patted him down with efficient thoroughness. Found the master key. Took it. Found the burner phone. Took it. Found the secondary line phone. Took it. Found the folded papers in the interior pocket. Stopped. The man unfolded them, held them toward the flashlight, looked at the first page, looked at the last page, at the margin annotation at the bottom, looked at Adrian. "Bissell wants him upstairs," the flashlight man said. They took him up to the 3rd floor in the main elevator, 1 man on each side with a grip on his arms that was professional and definitive, and communicated clearly that the grip would become something more consequential if he gave them a reason. He did not give them a reason. He used the elevator ride to breathe and to look at the floor indicator and to arrange everything he knew into the order he would need it in. Bissell's office was larger than it appeared from outside the frosted glass. A long desk, 2 monitors, filing credenzas along one wall, a conference table with 6 chairs that nobody was using. The overhead lights were on, which after the dark of the utility corridors was briefly overwhelming, and Adrian blinked twice before his eyes adjusted. Lorne Bissell was at his desk, He was 60, lean, with the kind of precision in his appearance that people developed when they were afraid of being underestimated. A good suit at 7 in the evening, reading glasses that he removed and set on the desk as Adrian was brought in, the deliberate motion of a man who wanted to be seen making a transition. Parker was standing to the left of the desk, arms at his sides. The two men who had brought Adrian up positioned themselves on either side of the door behind him. Bissell looked at Adrian for a long moment without speaking. He was looking the way you looked at something you were trying to place. Not recognition exactly, but the preliminary work of recognition, the search through catalog. "Mr. Cole," he said. "Mr. Bissell. Interesting evening you've been having." Adrian said nothing. Bissell picked up the folded papers from the desk, where the men had apparently delivered them ahead of Adrian, and looked at the last page again. "Where did you find these?" "In the office next door." "Who told you to look there?" "Nobody." Bissell set the papers down with a deliberateness that was more threatening than any raised voice. "You are a mechanic who was hired 11 days ago to service the estate vehicles. I'd like you to help me understand what a mechanic is doing on the 3rd floor of the East Wing at 7 in the evening with a master key and Claire Sue's private financial analysis in his jacket." "I think you already understand it," Adrian said. The room was quiet enough that the fluorescent buzz from the corridor came through the closed door. Bissell leaned back in his chair. "Parker tells me your background check came back unusually clean." "I live a boring life." "You lived a boring life. You were evicted 3 months ago. Downstate certification, no credit history before 6 years ago." He paused. "I've been doing this kind of work for a long time, Mr. Cole. A background that starts 6 years ago and has no friction before that is not a boring life. It is a constructed one." Adrian looked at him and made the calculation that had been waiting at the back of his mind since the elevator. Bissell was smart. Bissell was careful. Bissell had been operating inside the legitimate layer of a criminal organization for 11 years, and had done it well enough that Adrian had considered him a reliable asset right up until 8 weeks ago. He was not the kind of man who was persuaded by a better lie once he had identified the presence of lying. He was the kind of man who responded to a more powerful truth. "My name is not Evan Cole," Adrian said. Nobody in the room moved. "I know about the subsidiary transfers," Adrian said. "All 9 months of them. I know about the authorization codes on every transaction. I know that Claire Sue documented the chain before you removed her, and I know that you are holding something over her that kept her from going external with what she found." He paused. "I also know that you are not the architect of this. You are the mechanism. And the man who built the architecture is currently running my organization under the assumption that I am dead." Bissell had gone very still. "Your organization," he said. Quiet, testing it. "Yes." The silence in the office had a different texture now. Parker was looking at Adrian with the flat eyes, recalculating everything they had previously filed. The men at the door had not moved, but their quality of stillness had changed. Less ready to move forward, more uncertain about which direction forward was. Bissell picked up his reading glasses, put them down again. "That's not possible," he said, but he said it the way a man said something he was no longer sure of. "Adrian Valenti has been dead for 11 days, Adrian said. "There was a funeral, a casket. The right paperwork went to the right people." He looked at Bissell steadily. "Now ask yourself who benefited from that." Bissell stared at him. The recalibration happening behind his eyes was visible in the way his gaze moved, not to Adrian's face, but to the middle distance between them, where the implications were arranging themselves into a shape he did not like. "Marcus," Bissell said, almost to himself. "Marcus told you Adrian was compromised. Marcus told you the organization needed restructuring before a federal move that was coming. Marcus gave you a reason that felt like self-preservation and made you a participant before you understood what you were participating in." Adrian kept his voice level and even, because the moment you let anger into a room like this, you lost the room. "Everything you've done for the last 9 months has been building Marcus Vane's takeover. Not the Renata family's. Not yours. His." The color in Bissell's face had changed. It was not quite pale. It was the specific quality of a man who was holding himself very carefully together because falling apart was not something he could afford to do in front of people who worked for him. "If you are who you say you are," Bissell said, "then you need to prove it." "I need a phone," Adrian said. "One outgoing call. You can listen to every word." Bissell looked at him for 4 more seconds. Then he nodded at Harker. Harker produced a phone and held it out. Adrian took it and dialed Raymond's primary number, Scott. Not the relay, the direct line, the number that had not been used since before the funeral because using it meant stripping every layer of cover down to nothing and standing on the foundation of what was actually real. Raymond picked up on the first ring. "Yes." "It's me," Adrian said. "Authenticate for Harker." A pause. Then Raymond recited 4 words in a specific sequence that meant nothing to anyone who had not been in the room when the authentication protocol was established 11 years ago. A protocol that only Adrian and Raymond and one other person had ever known, and that other person had died 4 years ago. Adrian handed the phone to Harker. Harker listened, said nothing, handed it back. Adrian ended the call. The room was very quiet. Bissell's hands were flat on the desk. He was looking at the folded papers, Claire Sue's documentation, the margin annotation at the bottom, with the expression of a man seeing for the first time the complete picture of where he had been standing and what he had been standing on. "I want immunity," Bissell said. "That's not mine to give." "Then what are you offering?" "The difference between being the mechanism and being the architect," Adrian said. "That's not a small difference. Not for what comes next." Before Bissell could respond, Harker's radio crackled. The voice on it was one of the lobby staff, and the words came through with the flat urgency of someone trying to stay calm and not fully managing it. "Mr. Harker, there's a situation at the south exit. A woman, one of the cleaning staff. She's being detained by the men at the service gate. She's asking for someone named Evan, and they're not letting her go." Adrian was across the office before the transmission finished, past Harker, past Bissell's desk, to the window that looked out over the south side of the property. Below, in the pale wash of the security lighting near the service gate, he could see the gray sedan parked sideways across the exit. He could see one man standing beside it. He could see another man with his hand on the arm of a woman in a gray uniform coat who was not struggling, not screaming, standing with the specific stillness of someone who had made the calculation that stillness was her best available option. Mara. She had not made it to her car. She had not made it to the south exit. She was standing 40 yards below this window in the grip of a man who had come here with a description of a face and had found, instead, a woman who knew where the master key was kept and what the zip code was, which meant she had told someone, which meant she was connected, which meant she was leverage. Adrian put his hand flat on the window glass and felt the cold of it against his palm, the specific cold of outside air through single-pane glass, and looked down at the woman who had shared her food with a stranger and asked nothing in return, who was now standing under security lights being held by a man who worked for the person Adrian had trusted above everyone else, and he understood, with a completeness that left no room for any other thought, that the distance between him and her was not 40 yards. It was everything. It was every choice he had made in the last 11 days and the 14 years before them, and it had collapsed into this window, this light, this woman in a gray coat standing still because she was smart enough to know that stillness was what she had. And he was 5 stories up with Bissell behind him and Harker beside him and the papers in his jacket that proved everything and meant nothing if the man at the gate made a phone call to Marcus Vane in the next 60 seconds, and Marcus decided that a cleaning woman who knew too much was a problem that had one solution. "Get me down there," Adrian said. His voice came out different than anything he had said in this room, not the stripped-down directness of the revelation, not the controlled evenness of the negotiation. Something older than either of those things, and rawer, and Harker heard it and was already moving toward the door before Adrian finished the sentence, which told Adrian something about Harker that he filed away for later because later was a thing he intended there to be. They went down in the elevator, all 4 of them, Adrian, Harker, and the 2 men from the door. And the elevator was very slow, and the numbers above the door moved through each floor with the particular indifference of machinery that did not understand urgency, and Adrian stood in the center of the car with his jaw set and his hands at his sides and counted the floors and did not look at anything except the door. Ground floor. The south corridor was 40 feet long and ended at a push-bar exit. Adrian hit the bar at a pace that was not running because running in a corridor with 4 other men produced chaos, and chaos was not what this moment needed. He came through the exit door into the cold night air and the security lighting and the specific clarity of outside after too long inside. The gray sedan was there. The first man was there. The second man had his hand on Mara's arm. Mara saw Adrian come through the door. Something in her face shifted. Not relief, not yet. Something more complicated than relief. The expression of someone who had been calculating odds in the dark and has just received one new piece of information that changes the calculation without resolving it. The man holding her arm looked at Adrian, then at Harker behind him, and his grip did not loosen, but his posture changed slightly, recalibrating in the way people recalibrated when they realized the geometry of the situation had rearranged itself while they were not watching. "Let her go," Adrian said. The man did not move. "I'm not asking because I think you're reasonable," Adrian said. "I'm asking because in about 30 seconds you're going to understand that the man who sent you here has been lying to you for a very long time, and when that happens, I want to be able to tell him that you made the smart decision." Nothing. "He said Evan Cole was a threat," Adrian said. "I'm not Evan Cole." The man looked at him, at Harker, at the 2 men behind Harker. He was doing the math of bodies and authority and the specific quality of the voice he was hearing, which was not the voice of a mechanic. He let go of Mara's arm. She stepped forward, 3 paces, stopped beside Adrian, close enough that he could hear her breathing, fast, controlled, the breath of someone who had been managing fear for the last hour with everything they had, and had just reached the edge of how long they could keep managing it. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the 2 men. "Call Marcus Vane," Adrian said to the man from the sedan. "Tell him Evan Cole wants to have a conversation. Tell him to come to the Harwick estate." He paused. "Tell him Adrian is here." The man's expression did not change, but his hand moved to his phone, and in the silence of the estate's south lot, under the pale security lights, with the cold coming off the ground and the papers in Adrian's jacket and Mara's breathing next to him, and Harker standing behind him with the weight of a decision he had just made about which side of this he was on, Adrian Valenti stood in the skin of a dead man and waited for the person who had killed him to come and see that it had not worked. The phone at the man's ear connected. He said 3 words. He listened. The color left his face. He lowered the phone and looked at Adrian with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite awe, and landed somewhere between those 2 things that had no clean name, and said in a voice that had lost all its professional flatness, "He says he's already here." Headlights swept across the south lot from the service gate. Not 1 car. 3. 3 cars. They came through the service gate in a line, headlights sweeping the south lot in sequence, and they parked with the deliberate spacing of people who had been told where to position themselves before they arrived, which meant Marcus had been outside the gate for longer than the phone call, which meant he had been watching, waiting for the moment to be right, and had decided this was it. Adrian stood in the security lighting and did not move. The first 2 cars emptied, 4 men total, positioning themselves at the corners of the lot with the practiced economy of people who did this for a living. Not Renata family soldiers. His own men. Men he recognized, at least 2 of them, faces that had been in his organization for years, who were now arranged in the geometry of people who had been told their employer was Adrian Valenti and were looking at a man in a frayed mechanic's jacket standing in a service lot and trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they had been told for 11 days. The 3rd car held 1 person. Marcus Vane got out alone. He was 53 years old and looked it in the way that men who had spent their lives in difficult situations looked it. Not old, but used, the face of someone who had paid for every year with something. He was in a dark coat, no tie, and he moved across the lot with the unhurried confidence of a man who had decided, somewhere between the gate and this moment, how the next 10 minutes were going to go. He stopped 8 feet from Adrian. He looked at him for a long time without speaking, looking the way you looked at something you had convinced yourself no longer existed and were now being forced to reclassify. "You look terrible," Marcus said. Marcus. "I've been sleeping on a bad mattress," Adrian said. The two of them stood in the security lighting with 11 days and 14 years, and a betrayal that went back 18 months between them, and neither of them moved. "How long have you known?" Marcus said. "I suspected everyone. I knew it was you 2 days ago." Marcus nodded, the nod of a man filing information. "Raymond. Raymond gave me the administrator change on the distribution database. You made that change yourself. You didn't route it through IT." Adrian looked at him. "You were careful about everything except the things you did directly, the things you trusted yourself with. That was always your habit." Something moved through Marcus's face. Not guilt. Something more complicated. The expression of a man recognizing himself in a description he did not fully like. "I learned that from you." "I know. You trusted yourself with everything. No intermediaries on the decisions that mattered. I watched you do it for 14 years. He paused. "I watched you build something extraordinary, and I watched you protect it with fear, and I watched the fear cost you, year after year, the things that might have made it worth protecting. And 18 months ago, the Renata family made me a proposal, and I sat with it for 3 weeks, and I could not find a reason to say no that was bigger than the reasons to say yes." Adrian said nothing. "Not the money," Marcus said. "I have money. I've had money for 10 years. He looked at the building behind Adrian, the east wing, the lit windows, the structure of the thing they had built together. "I wanted to run something, not manage it, run it, and you were never going to step back." "So you decided to step me out?" "Yes." The word landed without apology, without performance. Just a fact, stated by a man who had decided to stop pretending it was anything else. Adrian looked at Marcus and felt the full weight of 14 years. Not as sentiment, not as grief, but as information. The accumulated data of everything he had known about this man and everything he had failed to see, and he sorted through it in the silence between sentences and arrived at something that was not forgiveness and not hatred, and was closer to the specific exhaustion of a person who has been carrying a wrong assumption for a very long time and has just set it down. "Claire Sue," Adrian said. "She's fine. She's in a hotel in Oak Park. She went voluntarily. I want that on record. Bissell told her she was in danger if she stayed. She wasn't. He exaggerated to move her fast." Marcus glanced at Harker, then back. "She can go home. Her documentation is accurate. No hesitation. The transfers are real, the authorization codes are mine, the account structures were rebuilt to consolidate control under the Renata umbrella over a period of 18 months. All of it is documented, and all of it is provable." He said it the way you said things you had already decided to say. Not confession, not bargaining, the flat delivery of someone who had made a calculation about where the exits were and found them all closed. "I assume Bissell gave you Claire's copies." "They're in my jacket." Marcus looked at the jacket, at the frayed pocket seam, at the man inside it who was supposed to be in a casket. "I underestimated you," he said. "Not as a compliment, as a diagnosis." "What gave it away?" "The truck." Marcus almost smiled. It did not reach anywhere above the mouth. "I pulled the property management files when you died, looked at all the open positions. The groundskeeper quit the week after your funeral, which was too convenient, and 2 weeks later a mechanic with a 6-year background and a 2009 truck with a cracked windshield showed up at the service entrance. I should have moved sooner. I waited because I wasn't sure, and I waited too long because I did not want to be sure." He paused. "Part of me did not want it to be you. Because if it was me, you had to finish it." "Yes." The 4 men at the corners of the lot were still positioned there. They had not moved during this exchange, but their quality of attention had changed, the specific change that happened when men who worked for an organization heard a conversation that reordered what they understood about who was in charge of it. Adrian could see it in the posture of the two he recognized, the slight recalibration, the weight shifting. He looked at them now, directly, for the first time since Marcus had gotten out of the car. "You've been told I'm dead," Adrian said, and he was not speaking to Marcus anymore. He was speaking to the 4 men at the corners. "You've been working for this organization for," he looked at the two he knew, "6 years, 8 years. You've been told that Marcus Vane is running operations because Adrian Valenti died of a blood clot 11 days ago. He let that sit for a moment. You can see that's not accurate. One of the men he recognized, a man named Garrett, who had been running Southside Logistics since Adrian promoted him 4 years ago, was looking at him with an expression that was doing a lot of work. Garrett knew the face. Garrett had been in rooms with that face. The mechanic's jacket and the 12 extra pounds and the different hairline were not enough to hold against the voice, the posture, the specific way of looking at people that Adrian had never fully learned to make into something else. Garrett said quietly, "Boss?" Not a question. The geometry of the lot changed in that moment. Not dramatically. Nobody moved. But the orientation shifted. 4 men who had been positioned as Marcus's support becoming 4 men who were waiting to understand what the situation actually was, which was a different thing entirely. Marcus felt it. He was too experienced not to. Adrian watched him process it, watched the slight adjustment in his stance, the moment where a different version of this conversation might have escalated into something irreversible, and then watched Marcus make the decision that told Adrian more about who the man actually was than 14 years of working beside him had. Marcus reached into his coat. Every person in the lot tensed. He produced a phone, held it up so everyone could see it was a phone, dialed a number, waited. "It's me," he said into it. "Stand down, all positions." He listened for a moment. "Because I said so." He ended the call and put the phone back in his coat and looked at Adrian. "There were 2 more cars on the north side. They're leaving." Adrian looked at him. "I'm not going to war with you over a lot in the suburbs," Marcus said. "I built half of what you have. I know exactly how it fights back. And I know you." He said the last 3 words with something in them that was neither affection nor contempt, but some layered combination that had no clean name. "You came here as a mechanic to find a traitor. You found one. This is the part where you decide what to do with him. I know what I'm doing with you." "Then do it." What Adrian did was take out the burner phone, the one Harker's men had confiscated in the stairwell and that Harker had returned to him in the south corridor without being asked, which was its own statement, and call Raymond on the primary line for the second time in one night, which meant stripping the last of the concealment away and standing fully in what he was. He told Raymond where he was. He told him what he had. He told him who was present. He told him to make 3 calls. To the organization's legal infrastructure, to the 2 distribution captains who had been approached by the Renatas, and to a specific number in the federal system that Adrian had maintained as a last resort for 14 years and had never used. He ended the call. He looked at Marcus. "You'll have representation by morning. The documentation goes to our legal team, not to the federal system. What happens after that depends on what you're willing to do with it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You're not handing me to the feds. What I'm doing is making sure the Renata family understands that every piece of documentation for the last 18 months of asset movement is now in the hands of people who know how to use it, which means the acquisition they were building toward is finished, which means the value they were paying you for no longer exists." Adrian looked at him evenly. "You're not useful to them anymore. That's a problem for you that is not mine to solve." Marcus absorbed this. "You're leaving me exposed." "You left yourself exposed. I'm just not covering it." Another silence. Longer this time. Marcus looked at the East Wing building, the lit windows, the structure that held everything they had built, and his face went through something that had no performance in it, a private accounting, the kind that happened in the space between what a person planned and what they ended up with. "The Renata family will move against me within the week," he said. "Probably. And you're not going to stop them. I'm going to be busy rebuilding what you spent 18 months taking apart." Adrian looked at him without cruelty and without pity, and with the specific steadiness of someone who has decided to feel the full weight of a thing and carry it anyway. "You had 14 years, Marcus. You had more than most people get. You chose to spend the last 18 months of it on this." Marcus looked at the ground, then up. "The 2 captains who didn't call you back," he said. "One of them, his kid is sick. He needed money that the organization wasn't providing. I gave it to him. He didn't know what it was for." A pause. "He thought I was being generous." Adrian said nothing. Don't punish him for that, Marcus said. He made a decision when he was scared for his kid. That's not the same as what I did. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. I know the difference, he said. That was everything. Marcus nodded once, the nod of a man closing a door he knows he will not open again, and walked back to the third car, got in, and drove out through the service gate alone, because the 4 men at the corners of the lot were no longer his men, and all of them understood that without anyone saying it. Garrett was the first to move. He walked across the lot to Adrian and stopped in front of him and looked at the frayed jacket and the wrong-colored thread in the pocket seam, and the face that he had known for 8 years and had been told for 11 days was gone. You want to tell me what I'm supposed to report in the morning? Garrett said. Tell them the director came back, Adrian said. Tell them there are going to be some changes. Garrett almost said something else, decided against it, nodded, and went to talk to the other 3 men. Adrian turned around. Mara was standing where she had been standing since the man let go of her arm, not far from the east wing door, not far from Adrian, positioned in the particular way of someone who had stayed because leaving felt wrong and staying felt uncertain, and neither option was clean. She was watching him with the look that he had been trying to categorize since the first day in the staff room and had never fully managed, that precise, patient, unperforming look that assessed without demanding, that waited without requiring. He walked to her, stopped close enough to speak without the whole lot hearing. She looked at him, at the jacket, at the face that was his face, not Evan Cole's, not the version that had sat across from her at a folding table for 11 days and eaten her food and listened to her describe a man named Bissell who did not know her name. Tell me, she said. So he did. He told her standing in the cold of the south lot while the other men dispersed and Harker went back inside to deal with Bissell, and the security lighting hummed above them. He told her the abbreviated version first, then the longer version when she did not react to the abbreviated one with the fear or the retreat he had expected, when she just stood there and took it in with that same quality of patient precision and waited for the parts that explained the parts she did not understand. He told her about the faked death, about Raymond, about the frayed jacket and the cracked windshield truck, about the 6 years of constructed background that had survived a background check, about standing in a funeral home at 2 a.m. looking at an empty casket and feeling nothing, which was the thing that had started all of it. Not the leaks, not the betrayal, but the specific vacancy of a man who had built something enormous and lost the thread of why he built it, somewhere in the building of it. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the middle distance the way people looked when they were arranging new information into a structure that could hold it. The food, she said. The first day. Yes. You ate it. Yes. You didn't have to. You could have said no. I know. He looked at her. I didn't want to. She turned that over. Why? He thought about how to answer that honestly, not the easy version, not because you were kind or because I needed to know what kindness felt like again, which were both true and both insufficient. The honest version, which was messier and more specific and more true. Because you weren't performing it, he said. Everyone I know performs everything. Loyalty, generosity, concern. It's all performed for an audience because there's always an angle. You pushed the container to the middle of the table and you looked at the wall. You weren't watching to see what it earned you. He paused. I haven't seen someone do something like that in a very long time. Mara looked at him. The security light was not kind to faces. It flattened everything, removed shadow, made people look like evidence of themselves rather than versions they had chosen. In that light she looked tired and cold, and exactly like what she was, a woman who had worked too many hours in a building owned by people who did not know her name, who had carried family debt like weather, who had shared her lunch with a stranger because it was the right thing to do, and had not thought about it again until the stranger turned out to be the most complicated thing she had ever been kind to. I'm going to need a minute, she said. Take it. She took it. Literally. She stood there for 60 seconds, breathing the cold air, looking at the building, and Adrian stood beside her and did not fill the silence because the silence was hers. The debt, he said, after the minute. Your family debt. I want to... No, she said. Mara, not like this. Her voice was flat and clear. Not as a transaction, not as payment for the food or the zip code or anything that happened tonight. She looked at him. If you want to do something for me, do it because you decide to, not because you're settling accounts. He looked at her. I'm not a ledger entry, she said. He nodded. Okay. Okay, she said. And that was that. They went inside. The building was different at night, quieter. The activity concentrated in the East Wing where Harker was managing the immediate aftermath. Bissell, the documentation, the calls that needed to be made to the legal infrastructure before morning. Adrian spent 2 hours in Bissell's office, not at Bissell's desk, but at the conference table, working through the structure of what had been moved and what could be recovered and what was gone. Bissell sat across from him and answered questions with the precise cooperativeness of a man who had made his calculation and was executing it cleanly, which was, Adrian reflected, the thing Bissell was actually good at, executing cleanly once the decision was made. It was the decisions themselves where he had failed. At 10:30, Claire Sue arrived from the hotel in Oak Park. She came in with the look of someone who had been afraid for several weeks and was now afraid of something different. Not Bissell, not Marcus, but the room she was walking into and the man at the conference table who was wearing a mechanic's jacket and had apparently been dead. Adrian stood up when she came in. Thank you for documenting what you found, he said. That took courage. She looked at him for a moment. I didn't know who you were. I know. I just knew the numbers were wrong. They were. You were right about all of it. He gestured to the chair across from him. I need to understand the transfer sequence in the order you found it. Can you walk me through it? She sat down. She walked him through it. She was precise and thorough and did not editorialize, and Adrian listened with the full attention he gave to things that mattered. And by midnight, they had a complete picture of the 18 months of asset movement that Marcus and Bissell had built together. It was recoverable. Not completely. Not cheaply. But the foundation was intact. The core holdings had not been fully transferred before the operation was interrupted, and with the documentation Claire Sue had preserved and the authorization codes that pointed unambiguously to Marcus Vane, the position was defensible. Not comfortable. Defensible. Adrian had spent enough years in difficult positions to know the difference, and to know that defensible was enough to start from. At midnight, he sent everyone home except Harker, whom he asked to stay for 1 more hour to secure the building and coordinate with Raymond on the incoming legal team. Then he walked through the East Wing alone, floor by floor, in the specific way he walked through spaces when he needed to take full measure of them. Not as an owner reviewing an asset, but as a man taking stock of what was real. He walked the 3rd floor corridor, stood outside Claire Sue's empty office, looked at the surface of the desk through the open door, the chair pushed in precisely, the monitor dark. Someone had cleaned this room in a hurry, trying to erase something, and the erasing had not worked because the person they were trying to erase had been more careful than they anticipated. He walked the 2nd floor, the maintenance corridor, the stairwell where 2 men had been positioned above him while he pressed his back against a wall and breathed through his mouth. The stairwell was empty now, the fluorescent buzz the only sound, and it felt smaller than it had felt in the dark when the footsteps were coming down. Most things did, afterward. He walked through the staff room on the ground floor, which at midnight was empty and smelled of the day's last use of the microwave. Whatever someone had heated at 5 hours cold now, the ghost of a meal that someone had brought from home and eaten alone at a folding table. The chair that he had come to think of as his, across from the chair that had come to be associated with Mara, was exactly where it always was. He stood there for a moment. The frayed jacket was still on. He had not taken it off. He had not thought about taking it off, which probably meant something, though he was too tired to work out what. He thought about the first day, the way she had pushed the container to the middle of the table without looking at him, without making it a gesture, the flat economy of someone who had decided to do a thing and was doing it without requiring it to become more than what it was. He thought about USS, the precision of it, the accuracy, the way she had identified in 4 days what most people who worked for him did not understand about how he moved through rooms. He thought about the zip code, delivered in a flat voice, and the master key on the 3rd hook, and the woman who left at 6:15 exactly, and the South Corridor exit, all of it given without a guarantee that any of it was going to matter, given because she had looked at him and made a decision about who he was on the available evidence. He was going to have to figure out what to do with that. Not tonight. Tonight there was too much to manage and too little of him left to manage it with. But the question would be there tomorrow and the day after, and it was not the kind of question that resolved itself by being left alone. He turned off the staff room light and walked out. In the weeks that followed, the structure rebuilt itself the way damaged structures rebuilt. Slowly, expensively, with visible seams where the repairs had been made. The Renata family, stripped of the intelligence pipeline that Marcus had maintained and facing documentation that could be deployed against them in multiple jurisdictions, withdrew from the acquisition attempt with the particular silence of organizations that had decided a position was no longer worth the cost. Not a defeat, they announced. A silence that meant the same thing. Marcus Vane survived the week. He survived the month. He went to ground in a way that suggested professional assistance, which meant he had prepared a contingency that Adrian had not found, which meant Adrian had not been as thorough as he believed. He filed that in the category of things he had learned about himself through this and did not enjoy learning, and he kept it there because the alternative to pretending the failure of imagination had not happened was the kind of thing that got people killed. Claire Sue returned to accounting work at a different firm. Adrian's organization, through a legitimate subsidiary, provided a reference that was accurate and unreservedly positive because it was both the right thing to do and because she had been more useful to him than anyone who had actually been on his payroll. Bissell cooperated fully with the internal accounting review. In exchange, the documentation of his involvement went to the organization's legal team and stayed there, held in the same way you held anything that was more useful as potential than as deployed force. Bissell understood this. He was good at understanding the structure of a situation once the situation was clear. He resigned and moved to another city, and they did not hear from him again. Garrett ran Southside Logistics and did it well, as he had always done, and Adrian promoted him formally 2 months later in a meeting that was brief and businesslike, and at which Garrett said, in his customary economy of words, "It's about time," and Adrian agreed. The captain whose son had been sick, the one Marcus had given money to, the one who had not called back, came to Adrian voluntarily, 3 weeks after the South lot, and told him the full story. Adrian listened to the full story. He asked 2 questions. He made one decision. He paid the medical bills himself, directly, through a legitimate account, with nothing attached to it except a brief message that said the organization took care of its people, and that taking care of its people was now going to mean something different than it had meant before. The captain did not say much. He did not have to. The rented room in the declining neighborhood sat empty for 3 days after Adrian returned to his real life. The bad mattress and the water-stained ceiling and the spring that found the same spot on his lower back, waiting for a tenant who was not coming back. He paid the remaining balance on the weekly rate through Raymond and had the key returned by messenger, which was probably more than the situation required, and was the kind of thing he did when he was trying to account for something he could not fully quantify. Mara gave her notice at Harwick 2 weeks after the South lot. She did it in writing, professional, 2 weeks' notice fully served. She did not ask Adrian for anything and did not reference what had happened and did not treat the departure as anything other than what it was, a person moving on from a job to whatever came next. Adrian found out through Harker, who mentioned it without emphasis in a status update, and Adrian noted it without responding and spent the next 4 days being businesslike about a variety of things that required his attention. On the last day of her notice period, he went to the staff room at 12:30. She was there, container of food, the specific economy of how she portioned it. She looked up when he came in, and she was not surprised, which told him she had expected something and had decided not to predict the shape of it. He sat down across from her. "You didn't have to give notice," he said. "You could have left the day after." "I said I'd work 2 weeks." She ate a bite. "I worked 2 weeks." He looked at her. "What are you going to do?" "I have an interview next week, medical billing company in Evanston." She paused. "My sister found the listing. She's been on me for years to get out of estate work." "Is it a good position?" "It's a better position." She pushed a portion of the container toward the center of the table without looking at him. The same gesture, the same economy, as if 11 days of Evan Cole and everything that came after had not altered the basic grammar of how she moved through a room. "You don't have to sit here." "I know." He picked up the fork she had put on the table beside the container. "I wanted to." She looked at him for a moment with that precise look. Then she looked at her food. They ate in the staff room at the folding table, with the microwave in the corner and the window overlooking the dumpster area, and outside the window the November light was the flat gray of a season giving up, and the room was warm, and neither of them said very much. When the lunch break ended, Mara put the lid on the container and put it in her bag and stood up and tucked the chair under the table the way she always did. "The interview is Tuesday," she said, 10 in the morning. "I hope it goes well," Adrian said. "I think it will." She picked up her bag, paused at the door with her hand on the frame, not turning back, speaking to the corridor. "The debt's paid off," she said. "In case you were wondering, I sorted it out 3 weeks ago." He looked at her. She still wasn't facing him. "I'm glad," he said. She nodded, walked out. Adrian sat at the folding table in the empty staff room and listened to her footsteps move down the corridor and fade, and he sat with the specific weight of everything that had happened in the last 6 weeks and let it settle to wherever it was going to settle. And he thought about an empty casket in a funeral home at 2 in the morning and a man who stood in front of it and felt nothing, and how far that felt from here, from this room, from a folding table and bad coffee and the smell of someone's lunch in a microwave, which was the most ordinary set of circumstances he had occupied in 20 years, and was, he understood now, not ordinary at all. He was still sitting there when Harker appeared in the doorway with a phone and a question that needed an answer. Adrian looked up. "Give me a minute," he said. Harker nodded and withdrew. Adrian sat for 1 more minute in the empty room. Then he stood up, tucked his chair under the table, the way she had tucked hers, and went back to work.